Somewhere beneath the quiet ground, hidden inside bones that have rested for thousands of years, there is a story that no ancient king ever wrote down. No traveler described it. No monument was built to remember it. No library ever collected it. And yet, somehow, it survived. It is a story written in a language so small that no human eye can see it without the help of modern science. A language carried through countless generations, passed silently from parent to child, from one family to another, from one forgotten village to the next. It has crossed deserts, mountains, frozen valleys, and endless seas without making a single sound. For thousands of years, it waited patiently. Today, we call it ancient DNA. But perhaps that name is too simple, because what scientists have begun to uncover inside these tiny fragments is not merely information about old bones. It is the memory of humanity itself. It tells us where our distant ancestors walked, whom they met, who became friends, who became strangers, who fell in love, who survived impossible journeys, and who quietly disappeared into history without leaving behind a single written word. Many of the greatest discoveries in history have come from opening forgotten tombs or digging beneath ruined cities. This one began by looking inside a single cell. And the more researchers looked, the stranger the story became. Some of the people who shaped our world were never mentioned in history books. Some civilizations vanished but still live inside us. Some families disappeared thousands of years ago, yet tiny pieces of them may still exist in millions of people alive today. The greatest human story may not be carved into stone at all. It may be hidden inside you. If quiet journeys through forgotten history are the kind that make you wonder just a little longer before falling asleep, then you've found a place where the smallest discoveries often reveal the biggest stories. You might enjoy returning for more nights like this, because there are countless mysteries still waiting beneath the dust of history. And if this gentle exploration already sparks your curiosity, leaving a like simply helps these forgotten stories find other curious minds who may never have known they existed. Now, settle into a comfortable place. Allow the busy parts of the day to drift a little farther away. There is no need to hurry through this story. History has already waited thousands of years. It can wait a little longer for us. Tonight, we are not following kings or famous generals. Instead, we are following something much quieter, something so small that for almost all of human history, nobody even knew it existed. Yet it has always been there, waiting. To understand why ancient DNA has changed the way we see ourselves, we first need to imagine a very different world. Picture a broad valley near the end of winter nearly 10,000 years ago. The morning air is cool. Mist hangs gently above a slow-moving river. Small groups of people are beginning another ordinary day. Children chase one another through damp grass. Someone sharpens a stone blade beside a fire. Another person repairs a woven basket. Nearby, an older woman carefully prepares seeds collected during the previous season. None of them know they are living at the beginning of one of the greatest changes in human history. They do not know that thousands of years later, people will try to discover who they were. They have no idea that traces of themselves will survive long after their names are forgotten. If someone had asked them how their story would be remembered, they might have pointed toward their children, or perhaps toward the tools they had made, maybe toward the land they cared for. They could never have imagined that the smallest pieces of their bodies would one day become the greatest historical record of all. For most of history, people believed that the past disappeared forever. Once a village vanished, it was gone. Once a language stopped being spoken, it slowly faded into silence. Once the last person remembered an old tradition, that tradition disappeared as well. Time seemed to erase everything, yet time was quietly preserving something else. Inside every human body are instructions, tiny biological letters arranged in an astonishing sequence. Scientists often compare DNA to a book. It is an imperfect comparison, but it helps us imagine the scale. If every instruction inside one person's DNA were printed into books, the collection would fill an enormous library. Most of those instructions help build and maintain the human body. They guide how cells grow, how eyes develop, how muscles repair themselves, how countless small processes continue every second without us ever noticing. But something remarkable happens from one generation to the next. Parents do not simply pass on traditions or stories. They also pass on these biological instructions. Each generation carries pieces of many generations before it. Imagine receiving an old family recipe. Perhaps your grandmother copied it from her mother, who copied it from her own mother. Over time, tiny changes appear. One ingredient is adjusted, another is forgotten, a different spice is added. The recipe slowly changes while still remaining recognizable. DNA behaves in a surprisingly similar way. Small changes happen naturally over thousands of years. Scientists call these changes mutations. The word may sound alarming, but most are completely ordinary. Many do nothing at all. Others become tiny historical markers. Each one quietly records the passing of time, generation after generation, century after century, millennium after millennium. When researchers compare these tiny differences between ancient people and modern people, they begin seeing patterns, not perfect answers, not magical certainty, but patterns, like footprints crossing wet sand long after the travelers themselves have disappeared. For centuries, historians relied upon written records. If no one wrote about an event, that event often remained hidden. Archaeologists expanded our understanding by studying buildings, pottery, tools, jewelry, and graves. These discoveries transformed history, but archaeology also had limits. A broken pot can tell us how people cooked. A stone axe can tell us how they hunted. A burial may reveal customs surrounding death. Yet none of these objects can easily answer one quiet question. Who were these people? Not what they built, not what they owned. Who were they? Where had their grandparents come from? Who married into their community? Did strangers arrive peacefully? Did neighboring villages become one family? Ancient DNA began answering questions nobody thought history could ever solve. The idea sounds almost unbelievable. Take a tiny fragment from an ancient tooth. Carefully protect it from modern contamination. Extract microscopic genetic material. Read billions of tiny biological letters. Compare them with thousands of other ancient people. Then compare those with living populations around the world. Slowly, very slowly, a forgotten journey begins to appear. Of course, this was far easier imagined than accomplished. For a long time, scientists believed ancient DNA was impossible to recover. DNA begins breaking apart soon after death. Heat damages it. Moisture damages it. Bacteria damage it. Time itself slowly tears it into smaller and smaller fragments. Imagine finding an old handwritten letter that has been left outside for centuries. Rain has washed away most of the ink. Insects have eaten parts of the paper. The remaining words are scattered into tiny pieces. Reconstructing the original message would seem nearly impossible. Ancient DNA presented exactly that challenge. Only much harder. Instead of dozens of missing words, there were billions of damaged biological letters. Many researchers doubted the work could ever succeed. In the 1980s and early 1990s, a few laboratories attempted the impossible. Sometimes they believed they had recovered ancient genetic material. Sometimes later studies suggested contamination from modern humans had entered the samples instead. The field struggled. Mistakes happened. Excitement rose. Then disappointment followed. Science often advances this way, not through perfect certainty, but through careful correction. Eventually, technology improved. Clean laboratories became even cleaner. Powerful sequencing machines became unimaginably faster. Computers capable of comparing enormous amounts of information transformed what had once required years into tasks that could be completed much more quickly. Then something extraordinary happened. Ancient DNA stopped being an impossible dream. It became one of the fastest growing fields in archaeology. Every year brought new surprises. Every excavation seemed capable of changing history. Scientists opened graves expecting one answer. The DNA quietly whispered another. Sometimes entire theories collapsed. Sometimes old ideas became stronger. Sometimes completely unexpected relatives appeared hundreds or even thousands of miles apart. History suddenly became much less simple than anyone had imagined. For a very long time, people liked imagining ancient civilizations as isolated worlds. One kingdom here, another kingdom there, separate, distinct, almost unmoving. Ancient DNA began revealing something different. People moved far more often than historians once believed. Families traveled. Communities mixed. Ideas spread because people spread. The ancient world was connected in countless invisible ways. Imagine watching birds migrate across continents. From the ground, each flock appears separate. Yet from above, countless invisible paths connect distant places. Human history may have looked much the same. Small groups moving slowly across generations, never realizing they were helping shape the future of entire continents. One of the first great surprises came from Europe. For generations, archaeologists debated how farming spread across the continent. Did local hunter-gatherers simply learn farming from their neighbors? Or did entirely new farming communities arrive from somewhere else? Pottery alone could not answer. Stone tools could not answer. Even ancient villages remained frustratingly quiet. Then DNA began speaking. The answer was more complex and more beautiful than either side had expected. Early farmers had indeed traveled. Many came from regions connected with Anatolia in present-day Turkey. Over generations, families slowly expanded into Europe. They carried crops, animals, new traditions, and their DNA. But they did not simply replace everyone already living there. They met hunter-gatherers, they traded, they lived beside one another. Eventually, many became one people. Their descendants carried both histories together. This was not merely the spread of farming. It was the meeting of families, the blending of worlds. A quiet human story invisible to history books but carefully preserved inside ancient bones. And once scientists realized DNA could reveal stories like this, they began asking an even bigger question. If Europe's history had been more connected than anyone imagined, what hidden journeys might still be waiting beneath the soil of the rest of the world? What made this question so fascinating was not simply the possibility of discovering new places on an ancient map. It was the chance to discover people who had quietly disappeared from memory, leaving behind almost nothing except the smallest traces inside their descendants. For most of history, people have imagined the past as a collection of separate chapters. One civilization rises, another falls, a new kingdom appears, a different language replaces the old one. Looking backward, it can seem as though history is made of clean lines and neat beginnings. Reality, however, is rarely so tidy. The deeper scientists looked into ancient DNA, the more those clear lines began to soften. Instead of separate chapters, humanity started to resemble one very long conversation, with millions of voices joining, fading, and joining again over thousands upon thousands of years. Imagine standing beside a great river. At first glance, it seems to be one stream flowing in a single direction. But if you could rise high into the sky, you would notice countless smaller rivers feeding into it. Tiny streams appear from forests. Mountain springs join the flow. Hidden underground water rises quietly to the surface. Every drop has traveled a different path before becoming part of the same river. Human history appears to work much the same way. Every family carries countless older families within it. Every village contains stories from places far beyond its borders. Every generation inherits journeys that most people never even realize happened. That realization alone quietly changed the way many historians began thinking about the ancient world. Instead of asking only where civilizations began, they also began asking who the people were who carried those civilizations forward. Because buildings do not move, people do. Languages do. Ideas do. Families certainly do. Thousands of years ago, long before roads connected continents or ships crossed vast oceans with ease, people still found ways to travel astonishing distances. Sometimes they followed rivers. Sometimes they followed herds of animals. Sometimes changing weather slowly encouraged families to search for better land. Sometimes curiosity itself may have been enough. We often imagine ancient people living in one place throughout their entire lives. Certainly many did, but others became travelers without ever thinking of themselves that way. A young couple might leave one valley after marriage. Their children might settle beyond the next mountain range. Their grandchildren could continue even farther. Generation by generation, no single journey seemed extraordinary. Yet after several hundred years, their descendants might be living 1,000 kilometers from where the story first began. No one generation had crossed the entire distance. Instead, humanity moved like growing tree roots, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. Ancient DNA has allowed scientists to follow many of these slow movements in remarkable detail. Sometimes the discoveries have confirmed ideas archaeologists already suspected. Other times they have completely rewritten the story. One particularly fascinating example came from a place that, for generations, had captured the imagination of historians. The wide grasslands stretching across Eurasia. These enormous open landscapes seem almost endless. Rolling plains extend toward distant horizons. In summer, grasses ripple like waves across the wind. In winter, snow can cover the land for weeks. To people living in settled farming villages, these grasslands may have seemed almost impossible to understand. Yet for thousands of years, communities flourished there. Many became skilled horse riders. Others mastered life among constantly moving herds. They carried few permanent buildings, leaving behind much less visible evidence than large cities. For that reason alone, their history often remained difficult to reconstruct. Then ancient DNA began filling the silence. Researchers studying burials across these vast plains noticed something remarkable. Several groups living there shared close biological relationships across enormous distances. People separated by hundreds or even thousands of kilometers sometimes turned out to be surprisingly connected. This did not mean everyone belonged to one single community. Far from it. Rather, it suggested that movement across these grasslands had been far more common than once believed. Ideas could travel. Families could travel. New customs could spread surprisingly quickly. One generation might never realize they were participating in changes that would eventually reshape entire continents. Some historians compare these ancient grasslands to invisible highways. Not paved roads, of course. Nothing so obvious. Instead, open landscapes that allowed people, animals, languages, technologies, and tradition to move gradually across remarkable distances. Ancient DNA quietly supported this picture. It showed that history was not simply about kingdoms expanding through conquest. Sometimes history spread through ordinary families seeking ordinary lives. That may sound less dramatic, yet perhaps it is even more remarkable, because history has often celebrated rulers while overlooking everyone else. The kings left monuments. The emperors issued commands. The generals recorded victories. But what about the shepherd who moved his family into a neighboring valley? What about the young woman who married someone from a distant village? What about the child born from parents whose grandparents spoke different languages? They rarely appeared in written history, yet they may have shaped humanity just as profoundly. Ancient DNA gives many of those forgotten people a quiet voice once again, not by revealing their names. Most of those names are gone forever, not by telling us what they believed. That often remains unknown. Instead, it reminds us that they existed. They laughed, worked, raised children, faced difficult winters, celebrated good harvests, comforted frightened families, watched sunsets, wondered about tomorrow. In many ways, they were not so different from us. This realization can feel surprisingly comforting. It narrows the distance between ourselves and people who lived 5,000 years ago. Rather than becoming mysterious figures trapped inside museums, they begin to feel like ordinary human beings whose lives happened long before ours. Perhaps that is one reason ancient DNA has captured so many imaginations. It transforms skeletons into stories, not complete stories. Science remains careful about its limits. DNA cannot tell us someone's favorite song. It cannot reveal whether a person enjoyed telling jokes around a fire. It cannot describe their hopes or fears. It cannot explain what dreams visited them while they slept beneath unfamiliar stars. Those parts of history remain beautifully mysterious. Yet even with those limits, ancient DNA offers something extraordinary. It can reveal relationships. A child buried beside an adult may truly have been their daughter. Two neighboring graves may belong to brothers. A woman buried hundreds of kilometers from where she was born may have begun life in another community before joining a new family elsewhere. Sometimes entire cemeteries become quiet family trees stretching across centuries. One discovery after another has revealed that ancient people were every bit as connected, complicated, and mobile as modern humans, even if their journeys unfolded at a slower pace. Among the most touching discoveries are those involving children. Archaeologists have long uncovered small graves that naturally stir deep emotions. No matter how many thousands of years separate us, seeing the careful burial of a child reminds us that love existed then exactly as it does today. Parents grieved. Families mourned. Communities remembered. Ancient DNA has sometimes allowed scientists to understand those family relationships with remarkable sensitivity. In certain burial sites, researchers found children resting beside close relatives. In others, adults buried together turned out not to be biologically related at all. Instead, they may have formed families through marriage, adoption, friendship, or social bonds that DNA alone cannot fully explain. That discovery carries an important reminder. Genes tell only one part of the human story. Culture tells another. Love tells another. Shared experiences tell another still. Being human has never depended upon biology alone. Even thousands of years ago, communities were built through choices as well as ancestry. The more researchers uncovered, the clearer it became that ancient DNA should never replace archaeology. Instead, the two fields work beautifully together. Imagine trying to understand an old painting while seeing only half of it. One side contains the landscape, the other contains the people. Neither side tells the complete story alone. Only together does the full image begin to appear. Archaeology reveals homes, tools, clothing, food, trade, religion, daily life. Ancient DNA reveals family connections, population movements, shared ancestry, long-forgotten migrations. Together, they allow history to breathe again. Sometimes the results are wonderfully surprising. In one village, people buried according to identical traditions turned out to come from remarkably different ancestral backgrounds. Elsewhere, people who looked culturally different shared surprisingly close biological connections. The lesson repeated itself again and again. Human identity has always been richer than simple labels. Long before modern nations existed, long before borders were drawn across maps, long before passports or citizenship, people were meeting one another, exchanging ideas, building families, and quietly shaping the future in ways they could never have imagined. And as these discoveries continued to unfold across Europe and the great Eurasian plains, scientists began turning their attention toward places where human history reached back even farther. Because if ancient DNA could rewrite the stories of relatively recent civilizations, what secrets might still be waiting inside some of the oldest human remains ever discovered? To explore that question, we must travel much farther back in time, not merely a few thousand years, not even 10,000. Instead, let your imagination drift back tens of thousands of years to a world that would feel both familiar and completely unfamiliar at the same time. The continents were already in the places we know today, yet the landscape looked very different. Vast sheets of ice covered large parts of the north. Sea levels were much lower than they are now. Coastlines stretched far beyond the modern beaches. Rivers followed different paths. Entire valleys that now lie beneath the ocean once echoed with the footsteps of people and animals. The earth itself seemed quieter. There were no cities glowing through the night, no engines, no electric lights, only the sounds of wind moving through grasslands, rivers flowing over stones, birds greeting the morning, and distant animals calling across open country. Small groups of humans lived within this enormous world. Most never met more than a tiny fraction of the people alive during their lifetime. The planet was vast. Its human population was remarkably small. Imagine standing on a hill overlooking an endless plain. You could walk for days without seeing another family. And yet, despite those great distances, humanity was slowly spreading into almost every corner of the world. This remarkable journey did not happen in a single wave. It unfolded over countless generations. Some groups settled in fertile valleys. Others continued exploring. Some adapted to forests. Others learned to survive in dry deserts or frozen landscapes. Each generation faced different challenges, and each left behind small traces of its existence. For thousands of years, archaeologists pieced together these ancient lives through stone tools, fireplaces, animal bones, cave paintings, and simple shelters. These discoveries revealed extraordinary skill and creativity. Even without metal, wheels, or written language, early humans understood their environments with remarkable precision. They observed the changing seasons. They knew the habits of animals. They recognized edible plants. They remembered safe water sources. Knowledge was passed from one generation to the next through careful observation and quiet teaching. In many ways, these people carried enormous libraries inside their memories. Yet one great mystery remained. How closely connected were these different groups? Did they remain isolated for thousands of years? Or did they occasionally meet, exchange ideas, and continue their journeys together? Ancient DNA slowly began answering these questions. One discovery in particular surprised nearly everyone. For much of the 20th century, people often imagined early human groups replacing one another in simple ways. One population arrives, another disappears. The story moves on. Reality proved far more interesting. As scientists recovered DNA from increasingly older remains, they discovered that humanity's past resembled a braided river rather than a straight line. Different human groups met, separated, met again. Sometimes they exchanged ideas. Sometimes they exchanged something even more lasting: families. Among the most famous examples are the Neanderthals. For generations, Neanderthals were imagined as mysterious people who vanished completely from the earth around 40,000 years ago. Their bones had been discovered in caves across Europe and parts of Western Asia. They possessed powerful bodies, broad shoulders, and distinctive facial features. For many years, illustrations often portrayed them as clumsy or unintelligent. Modern research has painted a far gentler picture. Evidence now suggests they cared for injured members of their communities. They crafted sophisticated stone tools. They controlled fire. They hunted successfully in difficult environments. Some archaeological sites even hint at symbolic behavior, suggesting lives far richer than early researchers once imagined. Even so, one enormous question remained. What happened when modern humans encountered Neanderthals? For decades, scholars debated the possibilities. Perhaps they ignored one another. Perhaps they competed. Perhaps they rarely met at all. Then ancient DNA quietly transformed the conversation. Scientists successfully recovered fragments of Neanderthal DNA from ancient bones. When those genetic sequences were compared with living people, something extraordinary appeared. Many modern humans living outside Africa carry small amounts of Neanderthal DNA today. Not large amounts, usually only a few percent, but enough to tell a remarkable story. Somewhere long ago, these different human groups met, and they had children together. That simple discovery changed how millions of people imagined human history. The story was no longer about one group replacing another completely. Instead, it became a story of encounters, of shared lives, of families that crossed boundaries no one had previously imagined. Think about that for a moment. Thousands of generations separate us from those distant meetings. Entire civilizations have risen and disappeared since then. Languages beyond counting have been spoken and forgotten. Yet tiny pieces of those ancient encounters still exist inside many people today. A person walking through a modern city may unknowingly carry small biological echoes of individuals who lived during the Ice Age. History suddenly becomes wonderfully personal. It is no longer something happening to strangers. It becomes part of our own story. Researchers soon uncovered another equally fascinating group. This time, not through impressive skeletons or famous archaeological discoveries. Instead, the story began with an astonishingly small clue. Deep inside a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, archaeologists found a tiny finger bone. It looked ordinary, easy to overlook. Certainly nothing suggesting it would transform our understanding of human history. The bone belonged to a young girl who had lived tens of thousands of years ago. When scientists extracted DNA from it, they expected either Neanderthal or modern human ancestry. Instead, they found something unexpected. The DNA belonged to a previously unknown human population. Today, we call them the Denisovans. What makes this discovery especially remarkable is how little we know about them from physical remains alone. Only a handful of bones and teeth have been identified with certainty. Yet their DNA tells an astonishing story. Just as modern humans shared ancestry with Neanderthals, some populations also inherited DNA from Denisovans. These genetic traces appear especially among people whose ancestors lived across parts of Asia and Oceania. Again, the message was gentle but profound. Human history was never a simple path. Different groups met one another, shared knowledge, shared families, shared futures. Even more remarkable, scientists discovered that certain Denisovan genes may have helped later populations adapt to difficult environments. One well-known example involves people living on the Tibetan Plateau. This high region contains far less oxygen than sea level. Breathing there presents challenges for anyone unaccustomed to such elevations. Yet communities have flourished in these mountains for thousands of years. Research suggests that one important genetic adaptation linked to coping with low oxygen may have ancient Denisovan origins. If so, a small biological gift from an ancient human population continues helping people thrive in one of Earth's highest inhabited landscapes. The thought feels quietly beautiful. A meeting that happened tens of thousands of years ago may still be helping human beings breathe more comfortably today. History is often imagined as something finished. Ancient DNA reminds us that history continues living inside us. Every generation carries tiny pieces of countless older generations. Most of those ancestors are completely unknown. Their names vanished long ago. Their homes disappeared beneath forests, deserts, rivers, or cities. Yet they continue traveling through time in ways they themselves could never have imagined. Of course, discoveries like these also remind scientists to remain humble. Each new genome has the potential to change existing theories. Questions once considered settled sometimes become uncertain again. This is one of the great strengths of science. Rather than fearing new evidence, it welcomes careful revision. Every answer becomes the beginning of another question. As more ancient DNA samples were collected from caves, valleys, coastlines, and forgotten burial grounds across the world, researchers noticed another fascinating pattern. Human populations had never remained perfectly still. Climate changed. Rainfall shifted. Ice advanced. Ice retreated. Forests expanded. Grasslands appeared. Rivers altered their courses. With each environmental change, people adjusted. Sometimes they remained where they were and adapted. Sometimes they moved only a short distance. Sometimes entire communities slowly began journeys that would last centuries. No single traveler could see the final destination. Each generation simply took another small step. A family crossed one valley. Their grandchildren crossed another. Their descendants eventually reached lands their earliest ancestors could never have imagined. Looking backward across thousands of years, these countless small movements form astonishing patterns, like stars slowly arranging themselves into constellations, like threads gradually becoming an enormous tapestry. The farther scientists followed these ancient journeys, the clearer one truth became. Human history was never only about survival. It was also about curiosity, about resilience, about ordinary people quietly finding new ways to live. And among all the remarkable migrations that ancient DNA has helped reveal, perhaps none has inspired more wonder than the long journey that eventually carried human beings across open water toward islands that had never before known our footsteps. For most of us, crossing a stretch of water feels almost ordinary. A ferry glides from one shore to another. A bridge quietly carries thousands of travelers every day. An airplane lifts into the sky, and within hours people arrive on another continent. It is easy to forget that for nearly all of human history, every journey across open water required courage, patience, and careful observation. Long before maps were drawn with remarkable accuracy, before compasses pointed north, and before written instructions guided sailors from one harbor to the next, people were already learning to read the sea. The ocean became a landscape of its own. Its waves carried messages. Its winds formed familiar patterns. The rising and setting of certain stars became trusted companions. Clouds gathered differently above islands hidden beyond the horizon. Birds flew toward land at particular times of day. Even floating branches and drifting plants could quietly suggest that another shore lay somewhere ahead. None of this knowledge appeared overnight. It accumulated little by little. A grandmother shared one observation. A fisherman noticed another. A child watched carefully and remembered. Generation after generation, these small pieces of experience became something extraordinary. They became navigation. When archaeologists first tried to understand how early people reached distant islands, many believed such journeys must have happened much later than they actually did. After all, the oceans seemed like enormous barriers. Yet the evidence slowly pointed in another direction. Human beings had been crossing water far earlier than once imagined. Some islands were never connected to nearby continents, even during periods when sea levels were much lower than today. Reaching them required deliberate travel across open water. Someone had to make a decision. Someone had to gather materials. Someone had to build a vessel strong enough to float. Someone had to believe that another shore existed beyond the visible horizon. That quiet act of faith may be one of humanity's greatest achievements. Ancient DNA has helped illuminate some of these remarkable journeys. By comparing the genetic signatures of ancient communities living on islands with those of neighboring mainland populations, scientists began tracing paths that had remained hidden for thousands of years. The results often surprised everyone. Communities separated by hundreds of kilometers of water sometimes shared close ancestral connections. Other islands, despite being geographically close, revealed very different histories. The sea did not always separate people. Sometimes it connected them. Imagine dropping a pebble into still water. Gentle circles spread outward in every direction. Human migration often unfolded in much the same way. A small group settled one island. Their descendants later reached another. Generations afterward, yet another voyage expanded the circle farther into the ocean. Each movement seemed modest on its own. Together they created remarkable networks stretching across enormous distances. Perhaps nowhere illustrates this better than the vast Pacific Ocean. Looking at a modern globe, the Pacific appears almost impossibly large. Its deep blue waters cover nearly 1/3 of Earth's surface. Thousands of islands rise from its waters like scattered green jewels. Some are volcanic mountains reaching toward the clouds. Others are low coral atolls barely rising above the waves. Many are separated by hundreds or even thousands of kilometers. To modern eyes, connected by aircraft and satellites, these distances seem manageable. To ancient travelers in carefully crafted canoes, they represented journeys requiring exceptional skill. For many years, scholars debated exactly how these distant islands were settled. Were the voyages accidental? Did storms carry people away from familiar shores? Or were they intentional explorations planned with remarkable precision? Ancient DNA joined archaeology, linguistics, and traditional knowledge to paint an increasingly detailed picture. The evidence suggests that many of these voyages were deliberate. People prepared for them. Communities organized them. Knowledge accumulated over countless generations. Rather than drifting aimlessly, skilled navigators appear to have understood their environment with astonishing sophistication. Traditional navigation methods preserved by Pacific Island cultures offer a glimpse into this remarkable knowledge. Experienced navigators memorize the rising points of stars. They recognize the patterns created by ocean swells traveling across vast distances. They observed seabirds whose daily routines revealed the presence of nearby land. Cloud formations reflected the shape of islands hidden below the horizon. Reading the ocean became almost like reading a familiar book. Every wave contained information. Every current offered a clue. Modern science continues to admire the extraordinary precision of these traditional techniques. Ancient DNA adds another layer to this admiration. It confirms that these remarkable journeys truly connected distant communities across generations. Families spread outward, cultures adapted, languages evolved, yet traces of shared ancestry remained quietly preserved. It is difficult not to feel a sense of wonder while imagining those first voyages. Picture a calm evening. The sea reflects countless stars. Wooden canoes rest upon gentle waves. Children sleep beneath woven coverings while adults watch the sky. No one knows exactly what tomorrow will reveal. Perhaps another island. Perhaps only endless water. Still, they continue. That quiet determination echoes throughout human history. Again and again, people stepped into uncertainty. Not because success was guaranteed, but because curiosity has always been one of humanity's strongest companions. Interestingly, ancient DNA has also shown that migration rarely flowed in only one direction. People did not simply leave one homeland forever. Connections often continued. Families visited relatives, communities exchanged goods, marriages linked distant settlements. Ideas traveled back and forth along the same routes. History sometimes resembles breathing. Expansion, connection, return, then expansion once again. This rhythm appears across continents. It appears across centuries, and it appears inside our own genetic history. One especially fascinating lesson emerging from these discoveries is that cultural identity and ancestry are not always identical. Two neighboring villages might share remarkably similar traditions while possessing different ancestral backgrounds. Elsewhere, communities with very different customs may prove closely related through ancient family connections. This reminds us to avoid overly simple stories about the past. Human beings have always been wonderfully complicated. People borrow ideas. They learn new languages. They adopt unfamiliar customs. They welcome newcomers. They create traditions together. Identity grows through experience as much as inheritance. That truth becomes especially clear when scientists combine ancient DNA with archaeology. Imagine two neighboring settlements discovered during an excavation. Their pottery styles differ. Their homes are built differently. One community buries its dead beneath stone mounds. The other uses carefully prepared earth graves. At first glance, they appear unrelated. Then ancient DNA reveals close family connections between individuals from both communities. Suddenly, the story changes. Instead of strangers living side by side, we begin seeing cousins, brothers, grandparents, children. Cultural differences no longer seem like barriers. Instead, they become evidence of human creativity. Families often carry more than one tradition. That remains true today. Across the modern world, countless households celebrate holidays from multiple cultures, speak several languages, prepare recipes inherited from different grandparents, and treasure customs gathered across generations. Ancient DNA gently reminds us that this blending is not new. It has been happening for thousands of years. The more researchers uncovered, the less convincing old ideas about completely isolated civilizations became. Human communities have always interacted, sometimes peacefully, sometimes through conflict, sometimes through trade, sometimes simply because two travelers happened to meet beside a river and chose kindness instead of suspicion. Those small moments rarely appear in history books. Yet they may have influenced the future more than great battles ever did. Imagine two families sharing a meal after meeting by chance. Perhaps they exchange stories. Perhaps one child learns a new word. Perhaps someone discovers a better way to weave baskets or shape stone tools. No chronicler records the occasion. No monument marks the meeting. Yet generations later, traces of that encounter remain inside both culture and DNA. History often grows through quiet moments, not only through famous ones. This realization has encouraged many historians to think differently about ordinary people. For centuries, history focused heavily on rulers, who became king, who conquered whom, who signed important treaties. These events certainly matter, but ancient DNA shifts our attention toward everyone else, toward mothers carrying infants across unfamiliar landscapes, toward fathers teaching children where fresh water could be found, toward grandparents preserving stories that would never be written down, toward young people beginning families far from the places where they themselves were born. These ordinary lives formed the true foundation of human history. Kings ruled for decades. Families shaped millennia. And perhaps nowhere is this quiet truth more moving than when ancient DNA uncovers unexpected family relationships inside long-forgotten burial grounds, allowing scientists to glimpse not only populations, but individual lives connected by love, responsibility, and generations of shared memory. There is something deeply moving about walking through an ancient burial ground. Even after thousands of years, there is often a quiet feeling of respect that settles over the place. The people buried there once watched the sunrise just as we do. They knew the warmth of a fire on a cold evening. They laughed with friends. They worried about those they loved. They hoped tomorrow would bring good weather, healthy children, and enough food for another season. Time has carried away nearly everything they owned. Their homes returned to the earth. Their clothing disappeared. Their voices fell silent. Yet somehow they are still able to tell us small pieces of their story. For many years, archaeologists could only guess at the relationships between those resting side by side. If two adults and several children were buried together, it seemed reasonable to imagine they belonged to the same family. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they did not. Ancient DNA allowed researchers to move beyond careful guesses. One by one, forgotten family trees slowly began to emerge from beneath the soil. At first, these discoveries focused on individual graves. A father buried beside his daughter. A grandmother resting near her grandchildren, brothers who had lived during the same generation. Each discovery was touching in its own quiet way, but as more sites were studied, an even larger picture began to appear. Entire communities could sometimes be reconstructed. Imagine opening a family photo album. The first page contains only one picture. Then another page reveals grandparents. The next introduces cousins. Soon dozens of familiar faces begin connecting together. Although many names remain unknown, relationships become visible. Ancient DNA works in much the same way. Each new skeleton becomes another page in an enormous family album stretching across thousands of years. One remarkable example came from Neolithic burial sites in Europe. These communities lived during a period when farming was becoming an increasingly important part of daily life. People built more permanent homes. Villages slowly expanded. Children grew up knowing familiar neighbors instead of constantly moving across the landscape. Researchers studying DNA from these settlements began noticing fascinating patterns. Certain families remained connected to the same communities for generations. Some burial grounds contained several generations of closely related individuals: grandparents, parents, children, sometimes even great-grandchildren. It was as though an invisible family tree had been carefully preserved beneath the earth, waiting patiently for thousands of years. Yet other discoveries challenged long-held assumptions. In several communities, people buried with equal honor were found not to be biologically related at all. At first glance, this seemed surprising. Then perhaps it became perfectly natural. Family has never been defined only by blood. Friends become family. Neighbors become family. Children are adopted. Communities welcome newcomers. Shared work creates lifelong bonds. Ancient DNA reminds us of biological relationships, but archaeology reminds us that human relationships have always been much richer than genetics alone. The two stories belong together. One tells us where people came from. The other tells us how they chose to live. This balance is one reason scientists are careful not to overinterpret genetic evidence. DNA can answer many remarkable questions. It cannot answer every question. It cannot tell us whether two unrelated people loved each other like brothers. It cannot explain friendships. It cannot describe acts of kindness. It cannot reveal songs sung beside evening fires. Those parts of history remain hidden within the human experience itself. Perhaps that mystery is worth preserving. After all, not every secret needs to be solved. Sometimes history becomes even more beautiful because a few quiet questions remain unanswered. As researchers continued comparing ancient genomes from different regions, another fascinating observation began to emerge. Many communities that appeared stable for centuries were actually changing gradually beneath the surface. Imagine looking at an old oak tree. From one year to the next, it seems almost unchanged. Its trunk appears the same. Its branches stretch toward the sky just as before. Yet inside, new wood forms every season. Leaves appear and fall. Roots quietly expand. Small changes continue year after year until, after many decades, the tree is noticeably different. Human communities often changed in similar ways. One family arrived from another valley. A generation later, another family married into the village. Children inherited traditions from both parents. New customs blended with older ones. No single year seemed remarkable. Yet over centuries, the community slowly became something new. Ancient DNA allows scientists to observe these gradual transformations with extraordinary precision. Rather than seeing history as a series of sudden replacements, they increasingly recognize long periods of blending, adaptation, and shared growth. This idea carries an unexpectedly hopeful message. Human beings have always influenced one another, sometimes through conflict, certainly, but just as often through cooperation, trade, marriage, hospitality, shared curiosity. These quieter interactions rarely leave dramatic monuments behind. Instead, they leave something subtler. A recipe passed between neighbors, a farming technique borrowed from another village, a language enriched by unfamiliar words, a child growing up with grandparents from different backgrounds. The history preserved inside DNA reflects these countless ordinary encounters. It reminds us that civilization is rarely built by isolated people. Instead, it grows through connection. One discovery after another has gently reinforced this idea. Researchers examining Bronze Age cemeteries occasionally found women who had grown up hundreds of kilometers away from the places where they were eventually buried. How did they travel such distances? The answer often appears surprisingly ordinary. Marriage. A young woman might leave her childhood community and join another family far away. Her children would grow up in a different landscape. Her grandchildren might never visit the valley where she herself had been born. Yet through DNA, scientists can sometimes recognize that remarkable journey thousands of years later. Imagine how many similar journeys have quietly shaped human history. Not famous expeditions, not military campaigns, simply people beginning new chapters of life. Those stories rarely survive in written records, yet they may have connected distant communities more effectively than any king ever could. The more these discoveries accumulated, the more historians began viewing migration differently. The word itself can sometimes sound enormous. It brings to mind vast movements of countless people crossing continents all at once. Certainly, such events have happened, but ancient DNA frequently reveals another pattern. Migration often occurred one family at a time, one marriage, one opportunity, one difficult season, one hopeful decision. Thousands of these small choices gradually reshaped the world. Looking backward, they appear like great waves across history. Living through them, they may have felt entirely ordinary. Perhaps a father simply wanted better farmland. Perhaps a daughter wished to begin life with someone she loved. Perhaps changing weather encouraged a community to seek safer conditions. Rarely did anyone know they were participating in history. They were simply living. That thought is quietly comforting. History is not created only by extraordinary people. Most of it has always been shaped by ordinary lives. Ancient DNA has also revealed another deeply human truth. The past was rarely as neatly divided as modern maps suggest. Today, national borders create clear lines across landscapes. Ancient people knew no such boundaries. Forests stretched uninterrupted for hundreds of kilometers. Grasslands connected distant regions. Mountain passes welcomed seasonal travelers. Rivers carried traders, storytellers, and families from one community to another. Ideas flowed wherever people moved. So did ancestry. This realization encourages us to think less about fixed categories and more about continuous relationships. Human history resembles a woven fabric. Each thread crosses many others. Remove one thread and countless connections disappear with it. No civilization truly existed alone. Every culture learned from neighbors. Every language borrowed words. Every generation inherited knowledge gathered by many different peoples. The farther scientists followed these invisible threads, the more remarkable the tapestry became. Because eventually the evidence began pointing toward something even older than villages, older than farming, older than the first cities, toward a time when the ancestors of every person alive today still shared an even deeper story, one that reaches back to the earliest chapters of our species itself. If we continue following that thread backward, farther than villages, farther than kingdoms, farther even than the oldest stories remembered by any culture, we eventually arrive at a time when humanity looked very different from the world we know today. There were no nations, no written languages, no cities rising above the landscape, only scattered groups of people living beneath the same wide sky. The stars that watched over them are the very same stars we see tonight. The moon followed the same quiet path across the heavens. The seasons arrived with the same patient rhythm, and yet every generation lived with a question that was far more immediate than it feels to most of us today. Where should we go next? It was not always a question of adventure. Often it was simply a question of survival. Rainfall changed. Animals followed new routes. Rivers became smaller. Grasslands slowly turned into forests, while forests in other places slowly opened into wide plains. The Earth has never remained perfectly still. Its climate has always been changing, sometimes gradually, sometimes more quickly. Human beings learn to change with it. This ability to adapt may be one of our species' greatest strengths. We are not the fastest animals. We are not the strongest. We do not possess sharp claws or powerful fangs. Instead, we observe, we learn, we remember, and perhaps most importantly, we teach. One generation passes knowledge to the next. That simple habit has carried humanity through thousands upon thousands of years. Ancient DNA now allows us to follow many of those generations in ways that would have seemed impossible only a few decades ago. Instead of seeing humanity as a collection of disconnected groups, researchers increasingly see long chains of ancestry stretching through time. Imagine holding the hand of your mother. She once held the hand of her mother, who held the hand of hers. Continue that image. Generation after generation. Not for 10 generations, not for 100, but for thousands. Each person connected to another by ordinary moments of daily life. Meals shared together. Children comforted during storms. Stories told beside evening fires. Small acts of kindness repeated endlessly. The chain becomes almost impossible to imagine, yet every one of us belongs somewhere within it. That realization quietly changes the way many people think about history. History stops feeling distant. Instead, it becomes deeply personal. Somewhere, thousands of years ago, one of your ancestors watched rain falling over a landscape that no longer exists. Another crossed a river whose course has long since changed. Another looked toward unfamiliar mountains and wondered what lay beyond them. They could never have imagined that one day their descendants would use tiny fragments of ancient DNA to rediscover pieces of their lives. For many years, scientists hoped that ancient DNA might eventually help answer one of the oldest questions in anthropology. Where did modern humans first emerge? The answer, supported by many different kinds of evidence, continues to point toward Africa. Not a single village, not one particular valley. Africa is an enormous continent containing remarkable diversity. Rather than imagining one small group suddenly appearing fully formed, researchers see a much richer picture. Different populations lived across different regions. They interacted over long periods of time. Ideas spread. Families formed. Communities adapted to changing environments. Modern humanity slowly emerged through these complex relationships. Ancient DNA has strengthened this understanding while also reminding researchers that many questions remain open. Recovering very old DNA from much of Africa is especially difficult because warm climates cause genetic material to break down more quickly than in colder regions. This means that many ancient stories may still be waiting beneath the soil, hidden simply because the evidence is harder to preserve. That limitation teaches an important lesson. Science does not claim to know everything. Instead, it builds carefully upon whatever evidence survives. Sometimes new discoveries confirm existing ideas. Sometimes they gently reshape them. Sometimes they completely surprise everyone. Patience is one of science's greatest virtues. Interestingly, some of the best preserved ancient DNA has been recovered from places where cold temperatures slowed the natural breakdown of genetic material. Frozen ground, caves, and cool mountain environments often protect fragile remains for thousands of years. Among the most remarkable examples are the frozen regions of northern Eurasia. Here, the earth itself sometimes acts like a great archive. Bones resting beneath frozen soil remain protected far longer than they would in warmer climates. Researchers working in these landscapes often describe the extraordinary care required during excavation. Every fragment matters. Every sample must be protected from modern contamination. Even a tiny mistake could introduce modern DNA into an ancient specimen. Imagine trying to restore a delicate painting using gloves so carefully that not a single fingerprint touches the surface. The work requires remarkable patience. Scientists wear protective clothing. Laboratories are carefully controlled. Air is filtered. Special procedures reduce the possibility of contamination. This attention to detail may seem excessive at first, yet it is absolutely necessary. Ancient DNA often survives only as incredibly small fragments. Those fragments can easily be overwhelmed by modern genetic material if researchers are not extraordinarily careful. The success of the entire field depends upon this quiet precision. It is rather beautiful when you think about it. The smallest pieces of evidence require the greatest patience. Perhaps history itself rewards those willing to move slowly. As laboratory techniques improved, another unexpected possibility emerged. Scientists realized they could sometimes recover DNA even when complete skeletons were absent. Tiny bone fragments that archaeologists once struggled to identify suddenly became valuable. Even fragments too small to recognize by eye could sometimes reveal remarkable information through genetic analysis. Imagine discovering a single page from an unknown book. At first, it seems insignificant. Then you realize that page contains clues leading to an entire forgotten library. That is often how ancient DNA works. One small fragment leads to another question. Another question leads to another discovery. Gradually, an enormous story begins unfolding. Some caves have yielded thousands of tiny bone fragments accumulated over many centuries. Most belong to animals. A few belong to humans. Sorting through them is painstaking work. Yet occasionally, among countless ordinary pieces, researchers discover remains from individuals who lived tens of thousands of years ago. Each one adds another voice to humanity's ancient conversation. Sometimes these discoveries reveal surprising encounters between populations already known. Other times they introduce entirely unexpected chapters. One particularly fascinating case involved the remains of a young girl whose parents belonged to two different human groups. Her mother was Neanderthal. Her father was Denisovan. This remarkable discovery showed not merely that these groups met, but that at least in one instance they formed a family. The finding was extraordinary because it transformed an abstract scientific idea into something deeply human. Instead of imagining distant populations existing separately, we suddenly picture two individuals sharing a life together. Perhaps they spoke different dialects. Perhaps they learned from one another. Perhaps they raised children beneath the same stars. We cannot know the details, but their daughter lived, and tens of thousands of years later, her tiny fragment of bone quietly revealed their story. Moments like this remind us that history is often far more gentle than the categories we create to describe it. Scientists use names such as Neanderthal, Denisovan, or modern human because classification helps organize knowledge. Real life, however, has always been more fluid. People meet. Communities overlap. Families grow. Boundaries blur. That has always been part of the human experience. The deeper researchers looked into ancient DNA, the more they found evidence not of perfect separation but of remarkable connection. And perhaps that is one of the most comforting lessons hidden inside our shared genetic history. No matter where our ancestors eventually settled, no matter what languages they spoke, or what traditions they followed, if we travel back far enough, all of our family stories begin weaving together into one immense human journey that is still revealing new chapters with every careful discovery made beneath the quiet earth. When people first hear about ancient DNA, it is natural to imagine dramatic discoveries appearing overnight. A scientist opens a laboratory report. A hidden mystery is suddenly solved. History changes in a single afternoon. The reality is much quieter. Most discoveries begin with patience, sometimes years of patience. An archaeological team may spend an entire season carefully uncovering a single burial site. Every layer of soil is documented. Every stone is photographed before being moved. The exact position of each object is recorded with remarkable precision. To an outside observer, the work may appear almost painfully slow. Yet every small detail matters. Imagine trying to understand a letter that has been torn into hundreds of tiny pieces. If even one fragment is placed in the wrong position, the meaning may change. Archaeology follows the same careful principle. Once a site has been excavated, it can never be excavated again. The original arrangement is gone forever. That is why archaeologists move with such care. They are not simply collecting objects. They are preserving information. Ancient DNA becomes only one part of that larger picture. After remains are recovered, another journey begins. The samples travel to specialized laboratories designed specifically for ancient genetic research. These laboratories often look very different from the laboratories people imagine from television dramas. There is little excitement, very little noise. Instead, there are clean white rooms, filtered air systems, carefully organized instruments, and scientists working with extraordinary concentration. Even breathing too closely to an ancient sample could introduce modern DNA. A single stray skin cell from a researcher contains far more genetic material than many ancient remains. For this reason, scientists wear protective suits, face coverings, gloves, and sometimes several layers of clothing designed to reduce contamination. It may seem almost excessive, yet without these precautions, thousands of years of history could become impossible to read accurately. The ancient molecules are incredibly fragile. Many have broken into tiny fragments only a few dozen genetic letters long. Imagine trying to reconstruct an enormous novel after someone has passed it through a paper shredder thousands of times. That comparison still understates the difficulty. Because unlike shredded paper, ancient DNA has also been damaged by moisture, bacteria, sunlight, changing temperatures and chemical reactions occurring naturally inside the soil. Some pieces have disappeared forever. Others contain small errors created simply by the passing of time. The work resembles restoring a beautiful stained glass window after centuries of weather. Many pieces remain. Many are missing. The original image must be reconstructed patiently, one fragment at a time. Powerful computers now assist scientists with this remarkable task. Instead of reading complete strands of DNA from beginning to end, specialized software compares millions of tiny fragments. Patterns slowly emerge. Fragments begin fitting together. What first looked like scattered pieces gradually becomes recognizable. The process is surprisingly similar to assembling an enormous jigsaw puzzle. Only this puzzle contains millions, sometimes billions of pieces. There is no picture printed on the box, and many pieces are permanently lost. Despite these challenges, modern technology has become astonishingly successful. Every improvement in sequencing techniques allows researchers to recover information that would have been impossible only a decade earlier. Questions that once remained forever unanswered can now be explored with careful confidence, not certainty. Science rarely speaks in absolute certainty. Instead, confidence grows as multiple lines of evidence begin supporting the same conclusion. That distinction matters. Ancient DNA is powerful. It is not magical. Scientists remain cautious because history deserves careful treatment. A surprising result must be checked, then checked again. Other laboratories often repeat the work independently. Only after consistent evidence appears do researchers begin suggesting that an old theory may need revision. This slow pace sometimes frustrates those hoping for quick answers. Yet it is precisely this careful approach that makes the discoveries trustworthy. Patience protects truth. One beautiful example of this careful process involves understanding family relationships within ancient communities. At first, researchers may notice two individuals sharing remarkably similar genetic patterns. Does that automatically mean they were siblings? Not necessarily. Additional analysis follows. Archaeologists study the burial positions. Radiocarbon dating helps estimate their ages. Artifacts found nearby provide cultural context. Only after combining many different kinds of evidence does the larger picture become clearer. History rarely reveals itself through one clue alone. It speaks through many quiet voices at once. Perhaps this is why ancient DNA has become such a valuable partner rather than a replacement for traditional archaeology. Each discipline notices something different. One sees the house, another sees the family, one studies the pottery, another studies ancestry, one reveals daily life. Another reveals long journeys across generations. Together, they tell a fuller story than either could alone. This partnership has transformed excavations across much of the world. Today, when archaeologists uncover human remains, they often think not only about the visible artifacts surrounding them, but also about invisible information resting inside the bones themselves. A single tooth may preserve remarkable genetic material. The dense bone surrounding the inner ear can sometimes protect DNA especially well, even after thousands of years. These discoveries have changed excavation methods. Objects once considered ordinary are now treated with even greater care. It is fascinating to think that some of history's greatest discoveries were impossible simply because earlier generations lacked the necessary technology. The evidence was always there. The bones waited patiently. The DNA remained hidden. Human knowledge simply had not yet reached the point where those tiny molecules could be understood. In a way, history itself was waiting for science to catch up. That thought invites another quiet reflection. How many discoveries remain hidden today, not because they do not exist, but because we have not yet developed the tools to recognize them? Every generation believes it understands the world rather well. Then another generation arrives with better instruments, sharper questions, and new perspectives. The story becomes richer. Ancient DNA has reminded historians of the importance of humility. No matter how complete our understanding seems today, tomorrow may reveal another forgotten chapter. One remarkable example of this came from Britain. For many years, archaeologists studied ancient communities living there before and after the arrival of farming. Stone monuments stood across the landscape. Ancient villages revealed changing ways of life. Researchers carefully documented pottery styles, burial customs, and settlement patterns. Ancient DNA added another layer. It showed that significant population changes had accompanied some of these cultural transformations. Yet even these changes proved more complex than simple replacement. Communities interacted. Some traditions continued, others changed. The past resisted simple explanations once again. Across Scandinavia, similar discoveries emerged. Communities adapted differently depending upon local environments. Some relied heavily upon fishing. Others embraced farming. Some combined several ways of life for generations. DNA revealed movement. Archaeology revealed adaptation. Together, they painted a picture of remarkable flexibility. Humans have always been excellent problem solvers. Rather than following one path, our ancestors experimented. If one strategy failed, another was tried. Over thousands of years, this willingness to adapt became one of humanity's defining characteristics. Climate shifts provide another fascinating example. During colder periods, some regions became difficult to inhabit. Communities adjusted by moving, changing food sources, or developing new technologies. When climates warmed again, people sometimes returned to landscapes their distant ancestors had once occupied. Ancient DNA occasionally allows scientists to observe these long cycles of departure and return. Imagine an old family home standing empty for generations before descendants eventually return. The building may have changed. The surrounding landscape may look different, yet faint connections remain. Human history contains many such returns. The relationship between people and place has never been entirely fixed. Land shapes people. People also reshape land. This quiet conversation has continued throughout our entire history. As researchers gathered more genetic information from every corner of the globe, another realization slowly emerged. The story hidden inside ancient DNA was becoming far larger than anyone had first imagined. It was no longer only about discovering individual ancestors or tracing ancient migrations. It was beginning to reveal something even deeper. It suggested that humanity's greatest achievement might not simply be survival. It might be our extraordinary ability to remain connected across immense distances of both geography and time, carrying tiny pieces of one another's stories forward through thousands of generations without ever realizing it. If we pause for a moment and think about that idea, it becomes surprisingly difficult to imagine. Every person alive today is the result of an unbroken chain of generations stretching back through thousands of years. Not one link in that chain could be missing. If a single person in that long line had lived somewhere else, met someone different, or made one small decision that changed the course of their life, history itself would look different. Each of us is connected to countless moments that have completely disappeared from memory. And yet, even though the memories themselves are gone, tiny traces remain inside our DNA. This realization has quietly changed more than archaeology. It has also changed the way many people think about themselves. For centuries, families have preserved stories about their ancestors. A great-grandfather who crossed a mountain range. A grandmother who remembered an old village. A sailor who settled in a distant port. These stories are precious. They connect us to those who came before us. But family memory has limits. Most people can name only a few generations with confidence. Beyond that, the details begin to fade. Names are forgotten. Places become uncertain. Old photographs lose their labels. Eventually, memory gives way to silence. Ancient DNA reaches beyond that silence. It cannot tell us everything, far from it. But it can sometimes reveal that our stories extend much farther than we ever imagined. It reminds us that every family history is part of a much larger human history. Imagine opening a book and discovering that what you believed was the first chapter is actually somewhere near the middle. Hundreds of earlier pages have simply been missing. That is how many researchers describe the feeling of studying ancient genomes. The story suddenly becomes much longer, much richer, much more interconnected. One fascinating aspect of this work involves studying how certain genetic traits became more or less common over time. At first glance, this might sound complicated. In reality, the idea is surprisingly simple. Imagine a village where one person happens to possess a small biological advantage. Perhaps they digest a particular type of food slightly more efficiently. Perhaps their body responds a little better to cold weather. Perhaps they recover from certain illnesses more easily. If those advantages help them raise healthy children, then those children may inherit the same useful traits. Generation after generation, such characteristics may slowly become more common, not because anyone planned it, not because nature follows a grand design, simply because small differences can matter over long periods of time. Ancient DNA allows scientists to observe some of these gradual changes. One well-known example involves the ability to digest milk during adulthood. Today, many people can comfortably drink fresh milk throughout their lives. Others cannot. This difference is connected partly to genetics. Thousands of years ago, however, many adults appear to have lost the ability to digest lactose after childhood. As farming communities began raising cattle, sheep, and goats, milk became an increasingly useful source of nutrition. Over many generations, genetic changes allowing some adults to continue digesting milk became more common in certain populations. Ancient DNA has helped scientists trace this remarkable process. It did not happen everywhere. It did not happen all at once. Different regions followed different paths. Once again, history proved wonderfully complex. Another example involves skin pigmentation. People sometimes imagine that human appearance has remained unchanged throughout history. The evidence suggests otherwise. As populations gradually settled in different environments over many thousands of years, certain genetic traits related to skin color, hair, and other physical characteristics changed in different ways. These changes unfolded slowly, very slowly. Thousands of generations passed while these gradual adaptations accumulated. Ancient DNA reminds us that human diversity has always been part of our story. It is not something new. It is the natural result of people adapting to many different environments across immense stretches of time. One of the most beautiful lessons hidden within these discoveries is that change itself has always been normal. Nothing in human history has remained completely still. Languages evolve, landscapes change, cultures adapt, families grow. Even our biology reflects countless generations of quiet adjustment. Perhaps this is one reason ancient DNA feels so fascinating. It allows us to witness change that would otherwise be invisible. Imagine watching a tree grow. If you look at it every hour, it appears motionless. If you return after 50 years, the difference is astonishing. Human history often unfolds in exactly that way. Most changes are too slow to notice during a single lifetime. Yet across thousands of years, they become extraordinary. Researchers have also begun studying ancient diseases through genetic evidence. This field is still developing, but it offers another remarkable window into the past. Sometimes traces of ancient bacteria or viruses survive alongside human DNA. By carefully analyzing these remains, scientists can learn about illnesses that affected ancient populations. This work helps explain how diseases spread, how communities responded, and how human biology gradually adapted over time. Again, the goal is not merely to satisfy curiosity. Understanding the past sometimes helps us better understand the present. Modern medicine occasionally benefits from knowledge preserved within ancient remains. History and science quietly support one another. There is something deeply comforting about that partnership. Knowledge is rarely isolated. Each discovery strengthens another, like threads woven together into a single fabric. One field asks a question, another helps answer it. Together, they reveal a richer picture than either could alone. As ancient DNA research expanded, collaboration became increasingly important. Archaeologists worked alongside geneticists. Historians shared insights with linguists. Climate scientists contributed evidence about changing environments. Geologists explained ancient landscapes. Computer scientists developed increasingly sophisticated methods for analyzing enormous amounts of information. The story hidden inside ancient DNA belongs to many different branches of knowledge. No single discipline could uncover it alone. Perhaps that reflects humanity itself. Great achievements often emerge through cooperation rather than isolation. One of the quieter changes brought by this research has been the growing appreciation for indigenous knowledge around the world. Many communities have preserved oral histories for countless generations. These stories often describe migrations, ancestral homelands, important landscapes, or relationships between neighboring peoples. For a long time, some researchers underestimated these traditions. Today, there is increasing recognition that oral history can preserve valuable knowledge across remarkable spans of time. When ancient DNA, archaeology, and traditional knowledge are considered together with care and respect, they sometimes support one another in fascinating ways. Not always. Each source of knowledge has its own strengths, but together they often produce a more complete understanding of the past. This respectful collaboration has become an important part of modern archaeological practice. After all, the study of ancient human remains is not only about science, it is also about people. Many of the communities connected to these ancient individuals still exist today. Their traditions continue. Their languages are spoken. Their ancestors deserve dignity. Researchers increasingly work closely with descendant communities, discussing excavation plans, laboratory studies, and the respectful care of ancestral remains. This partnership reflects an important lesson. History is not something that belongs only to museums or universities. It belongs to everyone. The bones resting beneath the earth are not simply scientific specimens. They were once living people, parents, children, friends, neighbors. Remembering that simple truth helps guide the work with humility. As remarkable as ancient DNA has become, perhaps its greatest gift is not the answers it provides. It is the perspective it offers. It gently reminds us that every human life becomes part of a story much larger than itself. A story carried quietly across generations. A story written not only in books or carved into monuments, but also inside the smallest living instructions passed from one family to the next. And the deeper scientists continued exploring that invisible record, the more they realized they were not simply uncovering forgotten history. They were uncovering the remarkable story of how every human being became connected to every other through one vast and continuing journey across time. When we hear the phrase, the human family, it often sounds like a beautiful idea, something symbolic, a thoughtful expression meant to encourage kindness and understanding. Ancient DNA suggests that, in a very real sense, it is also a scientific reality. If we could somehow place every family tree from every person alive today into one enormous map, something remarkable would happen. Those separate trees would not remain separate for very long. Their branches would begin touching one another, then crossing, then weaving together. The farther back we traveled, the more connections would appear. Eventually, the countless trees would become something closer to a single forest. It is almost impossible to picture. Every person has 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents. The numbers grow astonishingly fast. After only 10 generations, there are more than 1,000 ancestral positions. After 20 generations, more than 1 million. Continue far enough into the past, and those numbers become larger than the total population that was actually alive at the time. How can that be? The answer is surprisingly simple. The same people appear again and again within our family trees. Distant cousins marry. Communities remain connected across generations. Family lines overlap. Instead of expanding forever, ancestry begins folding back upon itself. This means that many people who seem completely unrelated today may actually share numerous common ancestors if we travel back far enough. Ancient DNA has provided remarkable evidence supporting this interconnected picture. Rather than isolated lines stretching endlessly into the past, humanity resembles an intricate web. Each thread touches countless others. One person's story becomes part of another's. One family's journey influences many more. It is a quiet reminder that separation is often much smaller than we imagine. The world may seem vast. History may appear divided into countless cultures and civilizations, yet beneath those differences lies a shared inheritance reaching back through thousands of generations. This realization has encouraged many researchers to think differently about identity. Identity is wonderfully rich. It includes language, culture, tradition, family memories, personal experiences, community, faith, art, food, music, and many other parts of life that DNA alone can never explain. Genes do not determine who we become. They tell only one chapter of a much larger story. That distinction is important. Ancient DNA is not a measure of human worth. It cannot tell us what someone believed. It cannot reveal kindness. It cannot explain courage. It cannot describe imagination. Those qualities emerge through lived experience, through relationships, through choices, through culture. Science helps us understand where our ancestors traveled. Life teaches us what those journeys came to mean. This balance has become one of the guiding principles of modern genetic research. The goal is not to reduce people to biology, quite the opposite. The goal is to understand how biology, culture, history, and environment have always influenced one another. Imagine listening to an orchestra. If you focus on only the violins, you miss the deeper notes of the cellos. If you hear only the drums, you overlook the gentle sound of the flute. Only together does the music become complete. Human history works in much the same way. DNA provides one instrument, archaeology another, language another, art another, climate another, oral tradition another. None tells the entire story alone. Together, they create something extraordinary. As researchers continued sequencing more ancient genomes, another fascinating pattern slowly appeared. Some regions experienced remarkable continuity. Communities remained connected to the same landscapes for thousands of years. Generation after generation lived beside the same rivers, harvested the same valleys, walked the same hills. Although their cultures gradually changed, many family lines continued across immense stretches of time. Elsewhere, history looked very different. Changing climates encouraged movement, trade expanded, new technologies spread, communities blended with newcomers. Ancient DNA captured these shifting patterns with remarkable clarity. Neither picture was more normal than the other. Human history has always contained both stability and movement. Some families remained rooted, others traveled. Most experienced a little of both. That observation may sound simple, yet it quietly challenges the idea that there has ever been one single human experience. There has not. Every landscape offered different opportunities. Every generation faced different decisions. A family living beside the Mediterranean Sea encountered a different world from one living deep within northern forests. A child growing up in mountain valleys experienced life differently from another raised along broad grasslands. All of these lives contributed to humanity's shared story. Ancient DNA also reminds us that chance has always played an important role in history. A sudden drought, a harsh winter, a river changing course, a volcanic eruption, an unexpected friendship, a successful harvest. Any one of these events could influence where a family settled, whom they met, and how future generations would live. History often appears inevitable when viewed from the present. Living through it must have felt anything but inevitable. Every generation faced uncertainty, just as we do today. Perhaps that is another reason these discoveries feel so relatable. The people of the distant past were not living inside history books. They were simply trying to build meaningful lives. One day followed another. Children grew taller. Parents grew older. Grandparents passed along stories. Young people dreamed about the future. Most never imagined that thousands of years later, scientists would carefully examine tiny fragments of their DNA. Their greatest concern was probably tomorrow's weather, or whether the coming season would bring enough food. Life has always been made of ordinary moments. Extraordinary history grows from them almost unnoticed. The field of ancient DNA continues developing at an astonishing pace. Every year, improved technology allows researchers to recover information from remains that were once considered impossible to study. Genomes become more complete. Dating methods become more precise. Computer models become more sophisticated. Questions that once seemed forever beyond human understanding slowly move within reach. Yet each answer creates new mysteries. That may be the most beautiful part of scientific discovery. Knowledge does not close doors. It opens them. For every migration that becomes clearer, another journey waits to be understood. For every ancient family identified, countless others remain hidden beneath fields, forests, deserts, mountains, and ocean floors. History is far from finished. The earth still holds many stories. Some remain buried beneath modern cities. Others lie beneath glaciers. Still more rest quietly below forests that have reclaimed ancient settlements. Every excavation has the potential to add another page to humanity's shared story. And perhaps somewhere, at this very moment, beneath an ordinary hillside that thousands of people pass without a second glance, ancient bones are waiting patiently. Not waiting for treasure hunters. Not waiting for fame. Simply waiting for the day when careful science, respectful archaeology, and quiet curiosity come together once again to let another forgotten voice speak across thousands of years. And perhaps that is the most remarkable part of this entire journey. We began by looking for answers hidden inside molecules so small they cannot be seen with the human eye. Along the way, we crossed frozen valleys, ancient grasslands, quiet villages, forgotten burial grounds, distant islands and caves that had kept their secrets for tens of thousands of years. We met early farmers planting the first fields. We followed families who slowly carried their traditions across continents. We discovered that Neanderthals and Denisovans were not simply names in science books, but people whose lives became quietly connected with our own. We watched generations come and go, each one leaving behind only the smallest trace, yet together creating the extraordinary story of humanity. At first, ancient DNA seemed like nothing more than a scientific tool. By the end of our journey, it feels more like a gentle bridge stretching across time. It reminds us that history is not made only of famous rulers, towering monuments, or great battles. Much of history belongs to ordinary people. A mother carrying her child through an unfamiliar valley. A father teaching the safest path across a river. Grandparents passing along stories beside a warm evening fire. Children laughing beneath the same stars that shine above us tonight. These quiet moments rarely appear in books, yet they are the moments that carried humanity forward. When we read about ancient civilizations, it is easy to imagine them as completely separate from ourselves. Ancient DNA softly tells a different story. Those people were never truly strangers. Their hopes were familiar. Their worries were familiar. Their love for family was familiar. They celebrated good harvests. They mourned those they lost. They wondered what tomorrow might bring. In the end, they were simply human, just like us. Perhaps that is why these discoveries feel so meaningful. They gently remove the distance between the present and the past. Thousands of years begin to feel like only a long conversation passed from one generation to the next. Each person added a few words before quietly handing the story to someone else. Now, without realizing it, we have become the newest storytellers. One day, countless generations from now, people may look back toward us with the same curiosity. They may wonder how we lived, what we believed, what dreams filled our ordinary days, what hopes we carried into tomorrow. Just as we have looked toward those who came before us, someone else may one day look gently toward us. That thought invites a quiet kind of humility. We are not standing at the end of history, nor are we standing at its beginning. We are simply one small chapter within a story that has been unfolding for hundreds of thousands of years. A story far older than any nation, older than any language still spoken, older than the oldest cities and the oldest kingdoms. Yet despite its age, it continues with every child who is born, every family that grows, and every generation that quietly inherits both the world and the responsibility to care for it. Ancient DNA has shown us that our differences are real and worth celebrating. Every landscape shaped people in unique ways. Every culture developed its own wisdom. Every community contributed something valuable to the long human journey. But beneath all of those beautiful differences lies something even older: connection. A connection so deep that it reaches beyond memory itself, beyond written history, beyond monuments. Hidden inside every one of us is a tiny reminder that none of us arrived here alone. We are the living continuation of countless forgotten lives, people whose names have disappeared but whose existence still echoes softly through time. Perhaps then the greatest lesson hidden inside ancient DNA is not simply where our ancestors traveled. It is that humanity has always moved forward together, sometimes slowly, sometimes uncertainly, sometimes through hardship, sometimes through hope, but always one generation placing gentle trust in the next. As our quiet journey comes to an end tonight, there is no need to remember every date, every discovery, or every scientific detail. Instead, perhaps carry with you one simple thought. Somewhere, many thousands of years ago, someone you will never know looked up at the evening sky. They watched the stars appear one by one. They listened to the wind moving gently across the land. They wondered about tomorrow. And without ever knowing it, they became part of the reason you are here today. The stars above them are still shining. The earth beneath our feet is still patiently keeping its memories. And deep inside every living person, the ancient story continues to whisper, not with words but with the quiet rhythm of life itself, passed from one generation to the next, across an unimaginable span of time. Thank you for allowing this forgotten story to unfold slowly beside you. Now, as the night grows quieter and the world becomes still, you can simply let these ancient journeys drift gently through your thoughts, knowing that while history may seem impossibly distant, it has never truly left us. It has been quietly traveling with us all along, and perhaps, somewhere beneath tomorrow's discoveries, another forgotten chapter is already waiting patiently to be found. For now, though, there is nothing more you need to discover, only the comfort of knowing that you are and always have been part of the longest story ever told. Good night.